Have you ever wondered how steep a train can go? Well, that answer fully depends on whether it's an adhesion, rack, or funicular railway. But because my time and the amount of fun I can have is limited, I'm going to go with door B and have a look at the steepest rack railway in the world, the Pilatusbahn. Rack railways, also known as cogwheel railways or Zahnradbahn in German, is the perfect teethy solution to when your slope is too high for the highly efficient rolling resistance system of steel on steel. With a maximum grade of 48%, the Pilatusbahn is by far the steepest rack railway in the world, with the second steepest in the world being the world's first rack railway, the Mount Washington Cog Railway, only coming in at just under 38% gradient. But I'm not going to list boring facts you can read on Wikipedia, because this railway represents more than just bolting some teeth onto a rail and calling it a day. I'm not just going to tell you how steepest railway, but also why steepest railway. We'll also look at the unusual track system, the mystery of the dragon logos being slapped everywhere, the other mountain peak that had a hissy fit at this engineering marvel, and finally, why the Swiss, like beavers damming a stream, seem irresistibly driven to lay railways up their most inhospitable mountains. So come with me today on a little excursion to check out some trains that test your neck muscles a little bit. Before we even get to the start of the Pilatusbahn on the other side of Mount Pilatus, one generally travels through Lucerne, which is basically Switzerland at its scenic and economically polished best, with lakes, medieval towns, and seamless transport all woven together. But we're not here for Lucerne. We're here for another breathtaking landscape, home to a true engineering marvel. We're here for the Pilatusbahn. Completed in 1889, the Pilatusbahn was built to bring tourists up the mountain much quicker than before, and more comfortable than the previously human-powered bipedal option, called walking. Getting to the Pilatusbahn is rather easy by train or even by boat, and oh my word, there is no faffing about on how up this thing goes. Videos do not do it justice, but enough salivating over this thing. Let's ride the damn thing. As we get into the carriages, they seem quite modern, but even though this seems modern, the Pilatusbahn has held the mantle of the steepest rack railway in the world since its opening date all the way back on the 4th of June 1889. Originally built as a steam-powered cogwheel railway, the train quickly gained popularity amongst the tourists. As electrification became more widespread across Swiss railways, offering greater power and reliability, it was only natural that the Pilatusbahn followed suit and was eventually electrified in 1937. The fully electrified routes start in Alpnachstad, ascending 4.27 kilometers with a height difference of about 1,629 meters. Sleek new carriages built by Stadler in 2022 now handle the climb, replacing the 1967 stock after the Pilatusbahn was closed for the winter to undergo a complete modernization of both track and rolling stock. This modernization was more than just swapping out carriages for ones with slightly more capacity, but involved some track optimization upgrades as well as major station upgrades in Alpnachstad. These upgrades allowed faster turnarounds at the station, and combined with the more efficient and powerful new rolling stock, this brought the turnaround efficiency down from 40 minutes to 30 minutes. A 10-minute reduction in turnaround time may not seem like much, but you'll see shortly why such timing is super important. As we climb up the beautiful mountain woods as we go through a few tunnels, we start to hear the quintessential informal Swiss anthem of cowbells at the line's midway crossing point where the up and down wagons cross each other at Amsigen. And here we can see one of the tricks of the Pilatusbahn to increase throughput of passengers by running two linked carriages in both directions, where before the modernization, the carriages would individually follow each other. This linking of carriages brought the capacity from around 300 people per hour up to 376 people per hour per direction. But as we see the trailing second unit follow us up, we can spot something unusual in the track system, just below the most convoluted word for driver. And here is where we look at the first engineering marvel of this track. The tracks don't seem connected, and they look like someone selecting the wrong track element in Roller Coaster Tycoon. As you can see the track element off to the side there. This seems like a perfect point to derail, pun intended, our beautiful trip up the mountain to talk about the engineering of this thing. Because what you're looking at is a sliding track switch. The reasons for this are related to the gradient of the track. Although the Pilatusbahn is today the steepest rack railway in the world, the original proposal didn't aim for such extreme gradients. When plans were first drawn up to reach the summit of Mount Pilatus, engineers envisioned a gentler slope. But as I've explained before, reducing the rise means extending the run. And in this case, that would have made the line excessively long and prohibitively expensive. The idea simply wasn't feasible. So the alternative was obvious: shorten the track by making it steeper. Yet this brought a new challenge. The only rack system available at the time was the Riggenbach or ladder design, already proven on the Rigibahn, the world's second and Europe's first rack railway. But at very steep gradients, the Riggenbach system risked failure because at such steep gradients, the gears could ride up and slip out of the ladder since the angle of force changed changed too sharply. Not to be bested by a steep mountainside, the project's engineer, Edward Locher, who had been involved since the proposal stage, eventually said, "Not on my Rolex," and set out to invent a solution. Instead, his idea was brilliant. Instead of the usual single gear pressing down onto a ladder rack, he designed a system where the rack rail was sandwiched between two horizontal gears. A flange running underneath locked the gears in place, preventing them from climbing out at steep angles. With this setup, the railway could safely tackle gradients of up to 48%, exactly what the Pilatusbahn demanded. But of course, building a railway that steep came with more than just gear problems. On normal railways, you'd lay the track on a bed of ballast stones to spread the load and keep everything stable. But at 48%, ballast would just slide right off the mountainside. The solution? Bolt the rails directly into the rock of the Mount Pilatus itself. It's brutal, but it works. And it's one more reason this line looks so unlike any other railway you've seen. However, there's still one more catch to using these horizontal drive gears. To have simultaneous up and down service, the trains would need to bypass each other. Of course, a track switch would be needed for the wagons to bypass each other on a dual track segment. However, a traditional track switch where the rack simply bends to divert the rail won't work. The sandwich gears, which grip the rack from both sides, would collide with any merging racks, making a standard switch impossible. So the simple solution to switching track segments was just to slide the track switches in and out of the desired path, which is arguably quite a common system on gadget barns like the monorail. All is good, but Edward Locher wasn't done cooking yet to make his mountain train as quirky as possible. Locher used his sliding table mechanism to allow wagons to divert into the vehicle depot just above the Alpnachstad station, but also to allow multiple carriages to load and unload. The station employed a funky use of the sliding transfer table. You see, the first sliding table above the Alpnachstad station, next to the depot, would allow the first two of four wagons down on the platform to unload. The other wagons would be waiting behind. And once the first two wagons were empty, the first wagon at the end of the platform would be slid across the empty track and moved off the transfer table, ready to slide the second wagon across. Rinse and repeat for all wagons to unload, then reverse the process to load. Seems quite simple. If it isn't already immediately obvious, such a process is very cumbersome, with the driver constantly having to get in and out to operate the transfer table at both the depot switch and the station switch. This straightforward system enabled the growing tourist attraction to accommodate the large number of visitors, both mountain enthusiasts and train lovers, and it managed high passenger volumes fairly well until after the turn of the millennium. But the Swiss master engineering wasn't done yet, because as the 60s roll around, the track's got another very quirky update. Unfortunately, one of the hotels on the mountain, the Hotel Bellevue, which was right next to the station, burnt down. The operators of the railway decided it was time for a major upgrade of the mountain station at the same time they rebuilt the hotel. So in conjunction with the new hotel construction, they also constructed platforms 3 and 4, which required another track switching mechanism. But unfortunately, there wasn't really much space on the steep hillside to easily install a sliding track segment. So engineers took one look at the Vietnam War that was raging on at the time and took inspiration from the Viet Cong School of Engineering booby traps by repurposing the Viet Cong's flippable trapdoor into a track-changing segment. But instead of having spiky boys on the underside of the trap, there would be another track element to divert the train off to its desired track segment. Such a system was quick to change tracks and also space-saving in the limited space. 2 of these were installed for the new platforms, as well as the original Platform 1 to service the new cargo station. So when it came to 2023 modernization of the system, along with the new rolling stock, the rotating track system was implemented at the bottom station in Alpnachstad that removed the sliding table at the main station depot switch, which coupled with the construction of a second platform, allowing the simultaneous loading and unloading of passengers from 4 rail cars. But back to the journey. Now, as we climb further and further up and out of the tree line, we start to understand why this train is so popular. It's honestly nothing short of incredible, with the jagged peaks towering above, sweeping views over Lake Lucerne below, and the feeling of gliding up a slope that seems impossibly steep. It's an experience that feels equal parts engineering marvel and natural wonder. And finally, after just about 30 minutes into the trip, we finally made it into the Pilatus mountain station, where as soon as you disembark, you can understand how such a tiny mountaintop can cater to the thousands of tourists within a day, because it's basically a mini city up here. There are shops, multiple restaurants and cafes, museums, even 2 hotels, and a mysterious spinny boy. The buildings here are spacious and certainly give off a James Bond villain layer vibe, because from the outset, it really doesn't look like such a big building. But now that I'm off the train, I can tell you about why there are dragon paraphernalia everywhere, and why it's a logo of the Pilatusbahn. Supposedly, the myth goes that dragons lived on the mountain, and the various caves you see around the place were their lair. And around the 15th century, it was reported that a farmer was near the mountain when a dragon basically 9/11'd itself into the mountain and left a clot of blood that turned into stone, supposedly again, with healing powers. Now, I'm not sure what to make of this myth, as I'm not really into the star signs, but yeah, the myth was quite strong in Lucerne folklore, and therefore cemented itself as mythology to become the logo of the Pilatusbahn when it was built. The cave certainly fit the vibe of dragons, especially with all the secrecy and cameras around, though they probably have something to do with this military radar installation. And actually, I need your help to find out exactly what these mysterious concrete circular coverings are. I can't find any information about them, and they're either previous military artillery holes or radar transmission dishes. Please, someone tell me in the comments what they are. I have no idea. But now that I've climbed a little higher, well above the buildings, it becomes clear why they built this railway, and others like it. And also why some of the locals up here weren't exactly thrilled about it when they built it. The two hotels up here, the Pilatus and the Hotel Bellevue, were built to satisfy the growing mountain tourism of Switzerland, fueled by wealthy international tourists. These wealthy international tourists were likely people from the highly industrialized nations and cities like London, Paris, Western Germany, etc., because they sought out Switzerland's fresh mountain air after having polluted their own. Even royalty such as the OG Queen Victoria came up here, and Teddy Roosevelt. But before I go on, I just want to ask if you enjoy this in-depth trip content, and if so, subscribe and leave a comment on your favorite mountain transit. Doesn't have to be in Switzerland, just be anywhere. So, back to the video. What started as curious international mountain climbers seeking a thrill to conquer peaks turned into a viable tourism industry for people who wanted the feeling of being on top of the world. And honestly, who could blame them? It's pretty bloody sick up here. Hotels, sanatoriums, and retreats for the wealthy started popping up all over Switzerland in the mid to late 19th century, such as the two on top of Pilatus that both opened in 1860 and 1890. But mass tourism was held back by the fact that in order to reach these peaks, you would need to walk, pay a donkey, or a low-paid immigrant to carry you. Although in modern times, even after the railway was built, it's still a bit of a thing to hike up here. It's very popular and saves you quite a few Swiss Frankie boys, and it's also quite a bit of a workout. And if you want to save yourself time and effort on the way down, you can just politely glide. This route made travelling to these peaks time-consuming, until railway engineering progressed just enough to be able to make a heavy steam boy go up a mountain. As mountain tourism grew in popularity, Switzerland took its first step towards mass transit in the Alps with the Rigibahn, the very first mountain railway in both Switzerland and Europe, was completed. Finished construction in 1871, about 20 kilometers east of where the Pilatusbahn would later be built, it quickly became a sensation among wealthy international tourists. Just 4 years later, eager to tap into the booming mountain railway market, a proposal and credit application was submitted for the Pilatusbahn. But the plan quickly hit a wall. Federal regulations at the time limited gradients to a maximum of 25%. To comply, the route would need to be far longer and financially unfeasible. As a result, the project was shelved. Anyway, as I mentioned before, a bunch of people like Edward Locher and some other engineers, not to be determined by a silly maximum gradient rule, got together and saw the Pilatusbahn as an engineering challenge only they could solve. So they officially proposed that they build a train up to the top of the mountain with a maximum gradient of 48%. And yeah, even in the late 19th century, you had some hella NIMBYism opposed to this idea. NIMBY, standing for not in my backyard, are people who don't like the development for various emotional reasons. Many people also objected to the Pilatusbahn proposal. Some argued it would disturb the cultural heritage of the dragon, while others claimed it would cheapen the traditional challenge of climbing the mountain on foot. Critics also dismissed the project as economically unviable, and in a classic NIMBY fashion that is as old as time, some feared it might attract too many foreigners. Although not quite in their backyard, the Rigibahn also objected to such a proposal because they so far had a monopoly on the mass mountain tourism and were profiting off it quite swimmingly, and they feared that another mountain railway would split the business between the two, making both of them financially unviable. Well, yeah, the government didn't really buy these reasons, especially because Rigibahn's objection to competition wasn't really founded. So construction began in 1886 with the creditors making a strict condition that the project be completed by June 15th, 1889. At the cost of 1.6 million francs, or 320 million francs roughly today. Creditors and Locher calculated a roughly 6.5% return on investment of this project, which was quite solid for the time. Finally, after years of construction and a good strong effort by the army of foreign workers, the Pilatusbahn opened on May 17th, 1889, and tourists were keen to ride it for about 16 francs, or about 400 francs in today's money. Certainly not cheap, but remember, this was targeted towards the wealthy tourists. Now, was this popularity too good that it stole patronage away from the Rigibahn? Well, no. Because you see, once the second rack railway was completed in Switzerland, it started a new era of tourism in Switzerland, the pioneering era. It was named the pioneering era of mountain transport because the relatively shiny new technology of rail was suddenly being tested in the mountains. Lines like the Rigi and Pilatus railways were built to unlock Switzerland's peaks for the masses. Though there was a small problem. They hadn't really figured out what people actually wanted to see. So they just started building trains up pretty much any mountain they could find. Basically like beavers who couldn't resist blocking flowing water, the Swiss couldn't resist building a train to the top of a peak. And oh my god, did they go ham. Year after year, cogwheel lines popped up across the country, as well as other funiculars and cable cars. And with 2/3 of Switzerland covered in mountains, there was no shortage of opportunities. Which is why today, Switzerland alone has over half of the world's mountain railways. This gave Swiss engineering a massive head start. To this day, they practically have a monopoly on mountain transport engineering. Funicular, ropeway, rack railway, odds are Swiss parts are in sight. Now I could go on for hours, but many of these railways will get their own future videos. When people picture Swiss mountain tourism, they usually think skiing and snowy chalets. But originally, these railways made their money in summer, because at the time, winter peaks were still too hostile due to the amount of snow and ice on top of these mountains. As mountain after mountain opened up, so too did new towns develop. Tourism boomed in these mountain areas, and the local economy shifted from poor agrarian societies into babysitters for the rich and uncoordinated. But let's pull it back to Pilatus, because after some wandering around, checking out the caves, looking down on some plebs, it was snack time in front of these big glass panorama windows. After which I would go back down. But instead of the train, I would head down by cable car. And why is there a cable car if there's already a train up here? Well, in the 1950s, the Little Rack Railway was starting to struggle with handling the amount of crowds. So they added the cable car straight up the cliff face to boost capacity up to the mountain. Now, the descent by cable car is also kind of fun, although a bit vertigo-inducing. It's straight down off a cliff where at the end you would find a second gondola gliding into town, at which point you can take a bus back to Lucerne. But, you know, me being a bit of a train freak, you probably ask me, why didn't you just take the train back down? Well, that's the Pilatus Mountain's one final trick to manage the crowds, because everyone wants to take the train up and down, but unfortunately the line could not handle that. So to manage crowds, they give you a discount for the round trip, train up, cable car down, or vice versa. If you insist on riding the train both ways, you can, you just have to pay a bit more. But make no mistake, either way it's beautiful. So that's the Pilatusbahn, the steepest rack railway in the world, made possible by Edward Locher's funky gear system, quirky track switches, and more than a century of constant upgrades. What began as a wild idea to lure rich tourists is now both a symbol of Swiss engineering and proof of how mountain railways shaped alpine tourism in Switzerland. It's not just steep because it can be, it's steep because that was the only way it could work. That makes Pilatus less of a curiosity and more of a case study in how the Swiss turn mountains into destinations. If you want to ride it yourself, the easiest way is a round trip package. The silver round trip with the Zentralbahn, or the golden round trip with the lake cruise across Lucerne. Both get you there and back from Lucerne's main station, in either direction, in style, comfort, with beautiful scenery. I hope you enjoyed this quasi-informative transport vlog, because I've got more Swiss deep dives coming into some other infrastructure. So let me know in the comments which railway I should ride next. And with that, I'll see you at the next station. Yeah, yeah!